Christians use that to well, I don't even know how to use this thing. This is crazy. Questions appear here. I don't know what's going to happen, but there's a link there apparently if you have a question to ask it up there in the corner. But I think that's a Google thing. I've never seen that before. So we're going to go through this workshop that I put together, and this basically came out of when I would go out and talk to people. A lot of people would say to me, I didn't even know that containers ran on Windows. And it was like, well, they don't just run on Windows. You can actually, they're kind of a first-class citizen. And with 1706, you can do almost everything with a Windows container that you can do with a Linux container. And so we wanted to kind of build a workshop that appealed to both beginners and, more advanced users. So with that, I'm going to take you through the agenda of the workshop, talk about the flow of it. If you're not muted, could you please mute?
How many beans do we have left over? And well, we don't have to ask the barista anything.
I'm just like being really patient while I wait for everybody to mute. Anyway, so let me go back. So we're going to talk about the agenda of the workshop. We'll talk about the architecture of the setup. We'll talk about how you get that architecture and how you provision it out, the resources available to you to help put the workshop on, as well as get your questions answered. And then we'll do Q&A. And then if we have time, we'll do demos. I put demos at the end intentionally because there's a video for every lab in the workshop. So if we don't have time to get to it today, you can actually just watch those videos and you'll see me going through each one of those labs. And so you'll have an idea of how they work. And this morning when I was setting up for the presentation, I destroyed my DTR instance. So I can't do all the demos anyway. So yes, that happens to everybody. So what is this workshop? So it's basically a 3-hour to 4-hour hands-on workshop. And I understand that most of you, if you're doing meetups, for instance, don't have 3 to 4 hours to do a meetup. So I did this last week at a meetup in Orange County, California, and we did it in 2 hours. We did it in 2 hours by cutting out a lot of the slides, basically, right? So there's about probably 30 minutes of slides at the beginning, 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how deep you go, that explain what EE is and what's the Docker engine and how do all those pieces fit together. And a lot of that stuff comes out through the workshop as you do it. I still think it's better to intro with those slides if you can, but ideally this is about 3 to 4 hours. But like I said, if you're pressed for time, you can edit slides as you need to. It really has, 4 goals. One is to expose people to Docker EE, including Universal Control Plane and Docker Trusted Registry. It provides an introduction to migrating traditional applications, which is something that if you haven't heard about it from us, you're going to be hearing more and more about. It's the idea of taking VM-based applications and moving them into containers. So we do a very, very basic example of that to get people thinking about what that process looks like and how they might want to engage in that. Again, sort of the root of it was what can Docker do with Windows and Linux today, and how do you manage different workloads in the same cluster, and how do you take advantage of that? And then some real basic orchestration concepts, scale and fail, health checks. Although health checks aren't in there right now, we're waiting for an update to the app. But once they get the last application uploaded, they'll scale it up. They'll fail a node. They'll fail a container. They'll see how that recovers and that basic scale and fail as far as orchestration. And then at the end of the day, like I said, the hope for us is that people will come out of it and it'll inspire these attendees to delve deeper into Docker. I expect the attendees, will probably be beginner to intermediate in most cases. It really is more of an intermediate workshop because we don't spend any time talking about what is a Docker push, what is a Docker pull, what is a Docker build, right? Anybody can do the workshop because you can literally just copy and paste the commands. but some folks may get a little lost in that regard. So, you know, when we have copy for you guys, I believe that has a description, and I think it actually has a line in it that says, you know, the workshop assumes basic familiarity with Docker. You don't need to know anything about Swarm or anything else, but you should know you know, at least how to basically run it. So the agenda, like I said, it's 3 to 4 hours, you know, figure 3.5. And that includes breaks, right? So it's probably 3 hours of straight up content. So I usually do a break between each of the major sections for about 15 minutes. So that gives you 3.5 hours. And then if people go a little slower, call it 4. So we start with what is Docker EE? So run through, you know, here's Docker, here's the Docker engine, here's what a UCP manager looks like, here's what a DTR manager looks like, or a DTR replica looks like, here's what a worker node looks like. You know, those sort of functions, those discussions with, not, you know, there's a few what people would call marketing slides, but a lot of it's really architecture and components and understanding how they fit together. From there, we build the EE cluster, and where people get stuck, you know, when people get stuck, this is where they get stuck. I've done as much as I can to make it as simple as possible, but people have to pay attention, and we'll look at the lab guide, and I'll point out some sticky spots for you guys. And then from there, we deploy a Linux application, and this is super simple. Clone a GitHub repo, Docker build, Docker push, right? So can you get access to what slides? The slides I'm presenting or the slides for the workshop? Yeah. Hold on just a second. I'm doing this real time. Anybody with the link? So you should have access to the slides I was just presenting. I just updated the permissions. So that might work with this link up here now. So if it doesn't, let me know. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so then we go from the sort of, hold on, let's see. I just, whatever. I'm not gonna worry about it right now. So the next part is this sort of migrating traditional apps. So it's the same as a little bit of what we do in the first section. We're deploying a Windows application instead of a Linux application, but rather than do a git clone and build from a known Docker file, we're going to take and use image to Docker to crack open a VHD, and then you get a Docker file, and then everything else is basically the same from there, right? Docker build, Docker push, Docker service create in the UCP UI. I think I might at some point update this second one to do the deployment via the command line, so people could see how you can work against the command line and against the UI, but right now everything's in the UI. So the third part is orchestration capabilities and Docker Compose. So we'll talk about, you know, what is a service, what is a task. Well, I might move that up earlier, actually, now that I think about it. You know, how do we handle failover at the node level? What's a health check? What's Docker Compose, and what's it give you, and why do you use it? And then from there, we'll go in and we'll deploy and manage a 2-service application with a Linux-based web front end and a Windows-based Microsoft SQL Server backend. You'll scale up the front end. You'll fail a node using Drain. And there'll be health checks as well, where you can go in and kill an individual container by visiting a specific URL. And you can watch that container die in the UI and then come back up. So that's the basic flow of the workshop. Yeah, so Marcelo, we're going to get into the infrastructure next. Marcelo was asking if we are going to use Play with Docker. So let's talk about the components, and then I think it's actually the next slide we talk about the infrastructure. So the workshop is based on 1706-1. It uses UCP 2.20 and 2.30. Those aren't the latest versions right now, so they may get updated, but if you were to go do the workshop next week, that's what you would be doing. We also use image to Docker. All of the image to Docker is pre-installed for you. You don't have to worry about it. So that's all built in. there's a total of 5 virtual machines in the workshop, 3 Linux and 2 Windows, and that's the repo for the workshop that has the guide and everything in it. So I'll make sure you have these slides so you have that address, obviously. So the next thing is, so that's what the workshop is made of. What do the attendees need? They just need a laptop, an SSH client, and an RDP client. They don't need Docker on their laptops. That's why we use 5 VMs. The goal is, outside of maybe an SSH client or an RDP client, workshop attendees do not need to install anything on their machines. And we do that just because I've done workshops where I said, well, let's use Docker for Windows, and people show up and they've got a work laptop and they don't have admin privileges. They can't install it, all kinds of other nonsense. So we don't do that. So
Hi, Lisa.
What's that?
Hello.
Okay. I'm just going to assume that didn't happen. So the architecture of the workshop. So all the nodes have a similar naming convention. So it's going to be a 3 to 4 letter prefix, and then the operating system, then the cluster number the student is working on, and either C, B, or A. So the infrastructure that I have provisioned for the demos is vid -lin or win -o1 -c -b -a. So like if I go in, actually, can you see that or not? You can't see it. I'm not sharing my whole desktop. Just a second. Okay. So you can see up here, right? So this is that prefix, vid, the OS, the cluster number in my case is 1, and B. This is the B node. This is the C node, right? And there's an A node. I'm pausing to check for questions. Anyway, so the C, there's only one C node. It's the UCP manager, right? The B nodes are your worker nodes. So the UCP worker for Windows is the B node, and for Linux, it's the B node. The worker node also serves as the DTR server, right? And this is always consistent. So if your attendees follow the instructions, then they will, they should be putting the UCP manager on C, the UCP worker on B, the DTR server on B, and then Windows node B will be their worker. And then they have these A nodes for Windows and Linux that they can actually SSH or RDP into, where they can do work, right? So when we get clone for the Linux lab, right, when we clone the repo, we're cloning it into the A node, and we're doing the Docker build on the A node. And when we do the image to Docker, we go to the Windows A node and we run image to Docker, and we do Docker build there, and we do Docker push there, right? So that's how the architecture is set up for the workshop. I had thought about potentially like just having people work on the worker nodes, but I decided that was just bad form, and so we would just give them the 2 workstation nodes. So the infrastructure, we are looking at moving to play with Docker. We are actively working with Marcos and Jonathan. They have a copy of the lab guide. They've done a lot of work on it. We think we're close, and when we get there, we will update the lab instructions. If you go into the setup instructions in the repo and it says, use Terraform, then we are not on Play with Docker yet. I'll update those as soon as we get to Play with Docker, and we'll notify you guys through the community as well. So if we actually go to the repo real fast, this is what I'm talking about. So in the repo, there is this provisions VM directory. And if you click into that, there's a README here on how to set it up using Terraform, right? So the whole lab is that right now I have Terraform scripts and instructions for Azure. So if you have an Azure account, it'd be great if you could use it. And you can use those Terraform scripts. You just need to basically provide your Azure credentials, and then you can provide out your own infrastructure. If that's not possible, and I understand for many, many people it will not be possible, we ask that you limit your workshop to 25 to 30 active participants. So you're going to have to decide what that means for your community. So I've done workshops where I've had over 100 people registered, and I've had 20 people show up. I've done workshops where I've had 40 people registered and I've had 30 people show up. And I've had workshops where I've had, 30 people show up, or 20 people or 10 people show up and 30 were registered. So I'm finding somewhere between 20 to 50% of the people show up. So if you want to have 25 to 30 active participants, maybe cap your registration at 50, right? And then if more people show up, they may have to double up or whatever. I'm doing this because I can only provision so many instances in any given Azure's region. And so if everybody's having, telling me they need 100 participants, so to do 100 participants, I have to provision 500 virtual machines for that one workshop. And that's just not scalable for us. So we will provide you infrastructure, but we ask that you, limit it to 25 to 30 active participants. So how do you get that? At least a week before your workshop. At least a week before your workshop, you need to email me. You need to tell me the number of participants, number of active participants. So how many clusters do you want me to provision? That 3-letter prefix that you want for your workshop. So for instance, I use airport codes. So when I'm presenting in San Francisco, all the workshops were SFO-LIN- whatever, right? When I'm in Portland, I use PDX, so you might do that, or you might use some other sort of 3-letter prefix for your workshop. The date of your workshop, I don't care about the time. I just want the date because I'll provision them the day before. And then I will send you back a PDF with a sheet that you can print and cut up, and it will give you the IP addresses and the fully qualified domain names of all your VMs. So there'll be one strip for every attendee, right? And you cut that up and then hand them a strip of paper, and that's how they get their lab instruction, their lab addresses. So dang it. I keep, make sure there's nothing else there. There's nothing else there. So the resources. So I talked about the GitHub repo. Let me just go back to it. Close that. And actually, this, escape out. Boom. So the repo has everything you need to do the workshop. The only thing that isn't in the repo are the demo videos, and we're going to put those on a Google Drive, and they'll be part of the kit that you guys get, right? There'll be a kit that has a couple. It'll probably have this presentation in it. It'll have the videos, and then everything else you need is sort of here in the workshop. So this directory here includes the files to build out the Linux Tweet app. Again, it's super simple. Then the provisions VMs directory includes the information on how to provision out the VMs. The README is the multi-OS. This is the lab guide that people use, right? And then the slides that you will present are here in a PDF, but there's also a link in the PDF to a Google Docs version of the slides. So this PDF, if you bring it up, will have all the slides in PDF format, but it also has a link right here to Google Docs. So if you want to present out of Google Docs, you can click on this, and from there you could export to PowerPoint if you want or whatever. But the PDF is in here just for your own edification. And then the Docker Compose file for the last step in the lab, which is to deploy the hybrid OS thing. And these are 2 older lab guides. I'm probably going to take them out of here. But the very first version of the lab we ever did was completely based on Swarm. And it was before 1706 EE shipped. So it was all based on Swarm. And then we went and added the MTA sort of image to Docker part of it. So those are the 2 older versions of the lab guides, which I probably will take out of here because I don't want to confuse attendees with them. So a couple things. When attendees are meant to do Linux, they'll see a penguin. When they're meant to be on their Windows VMs, they'll see a Windows flag. The early labs, we had a lot of people like trying to run Linux commands in Windows and Windows commands on Linux, and because they weren't following closely. The lab really does require that they pay attention. And the way that I do the lab and the way I recommend you deliver it is that you actually do the lab section and then you let them do the lab section. So they watch you do it and then they do it. But you're invariably going to have people that get ahead. And so a trick that I learned from our training department is give everybody a Post-it note. And then when you finish and say, okay, we're going to do this next section, it should take 10 minutes, put the Post-it note on the back of your laptop when you've completed the section. That will give you a visual indicator that the people, how far along your group is, right? If you got 15 people and you see 10 of them have the Post-it notes, you're probably good to go on. Or you know that you need to go visit those 5 people and see what's going on. The parts where they get stuck. Where they get stuck is they don't pay attention. Where they get stuck is they don't pay attention to little things like, this is the private IP of node C, right? So people might put the wrong address in, they'll put the public address in. The convention is anytime you see the less than greater than, you have to do a substitution, right? So, and there's always a note, be sure to substitute the private IP address for Linux node C in the host address. So that'll trip people up. This step always trips people up, although they've gotten better at it. It's when they have to go in and put the subject alternative names in, right? So we're using self-signed certs, so you've got to reference every possible way that you can hit the UCP server, right? So the private IP address, the public IP address, and the fully qualified domain name. So you have to make sure that people, this can be a little tricky for people. The other thing is, if you send me a private note, I'm going to read it here on the screen and everybody's going to see it. So just be aware. So if you're saying something not nice about Jenny or Lisa, she's going to see it. They're going to see it. It's not nice. Anyway, so this part trips people up a little bit. There will be a license file that you have to upload. They need to download that right here. That comes off of Google Drive. I'll be rotating those licenses. The UCP server is always on Linux node C. Self-signed certs means they're going to get a warning in their browser. So that some people are like, what? This part usually goes pretty well. I will say something about Windows. When you go into Universal Control Plane and you go to add a node, and I mentioned this in the guide, there is this thing here where you can choose Windows and you can choose Linux. I didn't want people to have to go in and read the docs and do these prerequisite steps and then have to come back here and copy and paste this. So in the lab, all the Windows prerequisite steps that you would normally do to add a Windows node, which includes pre-pulling some images and running a setup script to open up the firewall, they're all done. So in Windows, we have a much simpler process, which is just copy and paste this join token. So some people may ask you about that. It's noted here in the guide, but I just wanted to point it out. Installing DTR, the thing with installing DTR is that you've got to basically replace a lot of things, right? You've got to give it the fully qualified domain name of your B node on Linux. You have to give it that host name, and you have to give it this URL, which needs to be in this format, right, up here. So that can trip people up. But once we get past that, there's it's all pretty straightforward. Well, except for this. This is kind of wonky. So I don't know how many of you have run into this, but if you install Docker Trusted Registry with self-signed certs, you cannot push and pull to that registry because the Docker engine by default wants to have a good cert to set up the relationship between the DTR server and the engine. So there's a couple ways you can attack this, right, and solve this problem. There's 3 of them, actually. One is to use trusted signed certs. We're not going to do that. That's a hassle. The other is to modify the daemon.json file and use the insecure registry flag on the Docker daemon. We're not going to do that either because that's a pain in the butt. What we're going to do is we're going to install that self-signed cert on all the nodes. So there is a copy certs script in on each node, and it basically curls down the cert from the DTR server. It updates the certs on that node, and then it restarts the Docker daemon. So they need to run this script on every node, right? And it's as easy as basically vid-lin-01-b.west us2.cloud app.azure. If they copy this piece here and keep that in their buffer, it's super trivial to do. Anyway, so that is the last sort of tricky part. Most people, once they get past this, they can do the rest of the lab pretty well. This will trip people up, getting DTR UCP set up. I thought about automating the whole setup, but I actually want people to go through it. Because for some people it's super easy and I want them to see that. Anyway, so what else in here? Nothing of any import really. So I wanted to talk about what's in the repo. We talked about the Terraform scripts. Like I said, there's the Terraform scripts. Let's just look at them real fast since we have time. You come up here to provision VMs, and you actually don't need to be a Terraform person to do this. You will need to install it on one of your workstations to run it. But the only thing you need to really modify is this variables.tf file, and it's pretty well documented. And then it's also documented in the setup instructions. You've got to give it the name of the resource group you want to build, the storage account you want to use. That has to be unique. The DNS prefix, that's that prefix I mentioned, right? So in my case, the one we're working on now is vid. So you want to replace that. The region you want to provision into, right? I guess that's the other thing you need to tell me. And I'll update the slides, is if you want me to provision your infrastructure, if you don't tell me what region to put it in, I'm going to put it in West US 2. These are the VHDs that I've built to use to build out the VMs. And then this is the number of clusters you're going to build. So, if I have 30 students, this would be 30. And then you don't really need to change these last two. They get provisioned automatically. Once you set that up, you just do Terraform apply, and it goes out and builds that. It takes an hours to build a full workshop, right? A big part of that's copying over all the VHDs and everything into the storage accounts. But know that it takes, if you're going to provision your own infrastructure, do it the day before. Don't try to do it the day of. And once you provision it, don't change it. If you realize you made a mistake, tear it all down and rebuild it all again. That's my best advice for you. And then always take the first set of nodes for yourself and run through the lab on those, make sure everything is working, and then throw that away and then use a different set of nodes for when you actually run that workshop. Use one set to test and one set for yourself. So if you have 30 students, make sure you provision 32 nodes, because you're going to need two, one to test with and then one to run through the workshop actually with. Well, at least that's how I do it. You could do you could do Let's Encrypt in there. We've talked about integrating it at the product level, but Let's Encrypt is really great for POCs, and most people have their own CA in their environment. We've also talked about, I thought about doing that, but it added a whole nother layer of complexity because if you've ever tried to get the certs working in UCP and DTR, it's not trivial. It's much more trivial for us to just run that simple script. But yeah, I agree. Like in my own demo environments, I totally use Let's Encrypt, and I absolutely run that through. It's just a little bit much for this workshop, I think. There's the resources. The workshop slide deck is in there. The Docker post file is in there. The videos, I believe that Jenny and Lisa are going to make available to you guys sort of a kit, right? That has, an abstract. It's got like template, email template invitation type, verbiage. It's got the abstract verbiage. It should have these slides, and then it'll have a link to this repo in there. And so you can get all this other stuff. Oh, it'll have the videos, right? So like I said, there is a video for every section in the lab, me going through it. So if because we're not going to get to the demos today because the DTR broke on my demo setup, but you'll be able to see me do those and hear me talk through them. So we've had some suggestions in here already, and I think that is that's great. So please, this is I built this initially, and it was sort of a labor of love a little bit, and it kind of took off, and people have dug it. I've had as many as 130 people sign up for this workshop. They didn't all show up, but I had that many people register. So people are into it. They love the idea of getting their hands on. I think, meetups are great, but too many times it's, you're hearing from vendors coming in and pitching their software. Those are, like, to me, the worst meetups, even when I'm the one delivering them. The better meetups are when I have, when we have customers or coming in or users coming in talking about their implementation details and the problems, right? The journey stories. I love those. But the best to me are when people can come in and bring something that I can actually sit down and work on and learn and walk away and have done something. That's why I built this. But if you want to contribute, if you want to write Terraform scripts for AWS and do a PR into the repo for those, awesome. If you want to automate the install of UCP and DTR, great. We can do that. If you want to add some additional exercises, if you think there's things that work within the parameters of the existing workshop and you want to update the lab guide to do those things, by all means, please. My script to print out the IPs is totally lame. It doesn't do page breaks, for instance, and I haven't been bothered to figure out how to do that. I mean, I could probably figure it out. I just haven't been bothered. So if you look at my lame script and say, Mike, that is a lame script, I'll remind you that I'm not a developer. You can fix it, and that's awesome. Like, fix my lame script. If you find an error, or if you're working through the workshop and you see, like, man, people are always getting tripped up on this one exercise, and it's because they don't understand this one thing, then make an edit to the guide, submit a PR, file issues, submit PRs. I'll review them all. Where it makes sense, for sure, I'll take them. Where I think that there's where maybe I have a different thought, we'll have a dialogue, and I want this to be very collaborative. I want to leverage all the great intelligence and enthusiasm in the community to make this thing better. So with that, I am going to shut down the slides, and I'm going to see if we have any more questions. Do we have any more questions? Just do them like in the normal chat there's like 6 in the chat now. I'm in the chat now. So one thing I didn't get, Docker will provide an account for the workshop attendees to set up the infrastructure. No, so the way that the infrastructure is going to work is it will either be you guys provisioning out your own infrastructure. So maybe you've got a relationship with DigitalOcean, or you have a relationship with Amazon, and you want to build this thing out and you want to manage the infrastructure. Totally fine. You can do that. I will give you all of the information that you need to do that. It's in the setup guide. If you can't do that, you just send me a request, and what you get back is a fully provisioned workshop infrastructure. So you get back, if you have 30 people, you get back a list of 150 VMs, formatted out so in blocks of 5 that you can hand out to your attendees. So it's totally turnkey. What's this? So that's how, Wellington, let me know if that doesn't work for you. Yeah. And then, so exactly what it was answered very nicely in there. All right. I think that you can't join the slides is because I did that funky Google Docs Q&A thing when I started. So I think maybe you should be able to join them now. I did update the share permissions on them. It says anybody with a link can view, so you should be able to get them now that I'm not presenting anymore. I think that was only because I presented them and then I updated the permissions. I think it was some funkiness there. You should be able to get those now. We'll get back into Zoom. Any other, how tied to Terraform are you for AWS? Any reason not use CloudFormation? I can work on that. No, I mean, I don't really care, right? I mean, if you're I did Terraform mostly because Stephen Scher did it for a workshop at DockerCon, I think EU. He built this Terraform to deploy some stuff out that I think then Elton used for a different workshop. And then I took that and modified it for my workshop, right? So there was some really good base work already done by the community, and I just leveraged it. So why not InfraKit? I'm not even going to entertain that. I note the smiley face though. Any other questions? Like I said, ultimately our goal is really to get this up and play with Docker. Marcos and Jonathan are working really hard on that. We've got support from the Azure engineering team. We've got support from the Docker engineering team. We've got support from the community. So we really want to make that happen, because then it becomes super trivial, right? One of the problems with the workshop now from our perspective is, right, we have to pay those Azure bills. And when 100 people tell me they're going to show up and I provision 500 VMs for 3 days and they cost about $6 a day to run, and then they're up for 2 days and then 90% of those people don't show up, that's a lot of wasted money. And I hate doing that. So that's why we're really excited about Play with Docker. Anyway, other questions? Okay. Hey, Lisa and Jenny, how are we going to roll this? How are we rolling this out to the community? How are they going to get the rest of the stuff? Like the email template and the abstract and stuff. Are you... I don't know if Jenny's talking. I can't hear her.
Hello, can you hear us now?
Yeah, we can now. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. What was your question again?
How are we gonna roll it out? Like, so how do they get? Are we gonna just do an email blast with all of the pointers? Or are we gonna put it in the Slack, or right? Because they need.
Yeah, so we'll create this like kit, so like an event in a box type thing with all information, and as you said before, all the email copy that they need and all the links to everything, and we'll send that out in an email. Okay, groovy. That's one dot that I didn't connect before we started, so thank you for that. All right, so with that, I can do a couple of demos. What I want to do is maybe show you the image to Docker piece, since you guys haven't seen that. Can I get links for the research papers on Docker Swarm? I'm not sure what research papers those are, but if you hit me up on community Slack, I'm there. I'm Mike.Coleman on community Slack. You can, I'll try to run that down for you. So let me go back in. I got to do it from here and share my screen. Share the screen. And then we'll come over to here. So this is the Windows VM, right? So some people have asked me why I don't use SSH, and I just felt like most people have RDP already on their system. It's the native way that most admins interact with Windows. A few of them have OpenSSH, but I just figured like RDP is the more pure way of doing it. So that's why we do it that way. So if we change directory into the root of this VM, this workstation VM, and I do a dir, and those of you who are not Windows people, like the commands still work, right? So ls works, cat works, cd is the same. So a lot of the commands are still the same. So if you're not very familiar with Windows, it doesn't take a lot to get re-familiar with it. The only thing you got to remember is those pesky slashes. They're backwards. Anyway, so there's this VHD here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use image to Docker to crack that open. So in the lab guide, right? So if we go back into the lab guide, head back over there and slide down here to, oh, look, table of contents. I don't know if I actually ever tested the table of contents. Let's see. Oh, it works. So, right, this is just a cut and paste for the users. And there's a slide in the slide deck about what image to Docker is. And for those of you not familiar, image to Docker is an open source tool that basically allows you to examine VM hard drives, so VHDs, and I think there's a couple other formats we support, and look for specific artifacts, right? So in our case, we're looking for an IIS artifact. You can also do, I think, Apache. You can look at Windows servers and roles. You can look for users and groups. You can look for registry changes. What it basically does is it extracts those things from the VM and builds a Docker file. So if I hit enter here, what are we doing? Sometimes this thing doesn't, I don't know, maybe I lost my thing. There it goes. Sometimes it's slow. So it's going to mount the VHD and it's going to read it. And this process takes about 3 minutes. And it comes out and writes all the output into this directory here. So when you're done, what you end up with in that directory is a Docker file for the Windows Tweet app, right? And that Docker file, then you just go through and build it. So you can see it here. It's running the operation. It's looking at the file, mounting up the image, all of that. And that's what the verbose flag does. If you don't put that verbose flag in there, you don't see all of this output. And I like the output because it shows people that it's, you're still working, right? So you can see here, it's like looking for an IIS artifact. And then we've pre-pulled all the images it's going to need onto the workstations, so that hopefully speeds it up a little bit. It does take a little bit of time for those Windows containers to come up. So when you're doing this lab and the next lab, it's going to take a couple minutes for the database to come up. It's going to take a couple minutes for the Windows Tweet app to come up. So when this is done, you have the Docker file, and you have the www root directory out of that VM and the config file and the IIS JSON. You get a really poorly formatted Docker file. Like I want more space in here. These commands run together too much. Anyway, so you get the Docker file, and from here you just do a Docker build, right? And you tag it with your DTR server and the user. And, so in my case, you tag it with vid-lin-01-b.west us2.cloud app. You will get so tired of typing these FQDNs. Docker/Windows_tweet app, and you build it from here. This build takes a while, right? So, this is a good, what I like to do with this section is like, all right, once you get the build kicked off, go grab a cup of coffee, go use the restroom, take a quick break, because it's going to take, 5 or 6 or 7 minutes for this to come back. The other thing for people not familiar with Windows, a couple of pointers. If you click in here and you get this cursor, your window will never update. So you will come back and think that you're still Docker building, when in fact, it actually has finished, but you've put the command window into cut and paste mode. And so, and you can see it up here, it's in select mode. So if you hit enter, then it will start updating again. It will go out of select mode. The other thing is to paste into Windows, if you use the Mac RDP client, is Control V, not Command V. So if you hit Command, you end up bringing this up, right? So it's Control V to paste. Anyway, I'm not going to do the rest of this demo, but the rest of it is just basically pushing the DTR and then deploying the service in universal control plane, which, is pretty well documented. Yeah, and the other one is the last demo is pretty straightforward. It's just cutting and pasting the compose file. So let's go back in here. I'm going to stop the share. Let's go back into the chat. Where'd it go? All right. Okay, a couple of questions. One, how much average time to run all the workshop tests? So that's a good question with not a great answer, because I can run all the workshop. I can run through the whole workshop in 25 minutes, right? Because it's second nature to me. And most of you could probably do it pretty quick as well. Your attendees, and this goes into a question from Marcelo, which is, what does the audience look like? It varies, right? And what I will say though is the meetups that I go to, and other meetup organizers, feel free to chime in. The meetups I go to here in Portland, because I'm a sort of pseudo co-organizer, although Nan and those guys do most of the work. We almost always have 35 to 40% new people. Every one that we do has a lot of new folks. So you're going to get a lot of beginners. I think a lot of them, are probably more on the sysadmin side than the developer side. And this is definitely a sysadmin focused workshop. Because that's my background, that's what I work on. And I think most of them are Linux because they didn't know they could do Windows, right? So part of the attraction of this, especially if you're a meetup organizer, is to bring in more Windows people and grow your meetup, right? And start bringing in some more Windows expertise, because I think the whole purpose of a meetup, right, is for us to all get together and share what we know with the people who don't know that stuff, right? And vice versa. right? It's this great symbiotic relationship where people are going to come in and teach me a bunch of stuff that I didn't know, and I'm going to hopefully share a bunch of knowledge that was new to some folks, right? So the workshop, like I said, anybody can do it. They're going to be more comfortable if they are a little bit versed in Docker. I think even developers will like it because I think it gives the developers an opportunity to see a little bit what the operation side of a Docker environment looks like, right? What happens to my work after I ship it off? How are they putting it in production? Other questions? All right, Lisa, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for joining the call, first of all. We have been recording this, so if you missed anything, don't worry. We will be sending out the recording in an email, and you can watch it again. And for those who couldn't make it, we'll send it to them as well. And basically just keep an eye out for further information. So we'll send you all the links you need, all the copy to use. I've already sent you all the link to the information and FAQ docs. So just keep referring to that, first of all, if you have any questions. And then, of course, I'm always available on Slack for any questions, as is Jenny for the captains. So if there's anything you can't find in the FAQ doc, feel free to send us a message and we can help you. We're here to help. So yeah, but I'm just really looking forward to getting this kickstarted and to seeing what events we have and where we have events. It's super exciting. So I hope you're all as excited as we are.
Yeah, and to echo exactly what Lisa was saying, if you go through the guide, you're confused by something, if something's not working for you, let me know. I'm more than happy to try to help you troubleshoot. And our goal is for this to be a nice piece of content that you guys can leverage in your regions and with your community members, and we want it to be successful. So anything we can do to help there, just let us know. All right. So you guys have 10 minutes before the office hours with, I think it's Brett and Lisa, I think, doing it today? Or Laura. So yeah, go do that. Learn about Swarm. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.